From I Am Interchange, it's the Hatch podcast series. Once upon a time, journalism started with a letter nailed to a tree or a door. Some declaration, some warning, some truth someone wanted heard, and people would gather in the square to listen. News wasn't just information, it was a shared experience. Then came the daily paper, then the evening broadcast. News once a day, steady, dependable, until it wasn't. Now it's constant. 24 hours, push notifications, feeds that never stop refreshing. And somewhere in all that, we started to wonder, what's the difference between fact and opinion anymore? Between storytelling and spin? I'm Tate Chamberlin. In this episode, I talk with Sleeves, Emily Messner, Joey Young, and Chris Denson about the evolution of journalism, from editorial boards and ad sales to freelancers, podcasts, and algorithms, how we depict what's true, and whether journalism can still sustain itself. Because while we were putting this episode together, the press corps was literally packing up and leaving the Pentagon. A small headline that somehow says everything about where we are right now. So, is there a future in journalism? Or do we have to make one, even if there isn't? It's Dispatch from the Heartland. Join us, won't you? I'm curious what your relationship to journalism and media is.
We own some small media outlets in Kansas, near Wichita.
We is you and your wife?
Yes, my wife and I, and my business partner Bruce. We operate 3 small publications, and I've just been in this despite almost being 40. I've been in this almost, I think at this point, a majority of my life at this point. That's my relationship with journalism at this point, is very much from an operation standpoint and from seeing how it's all done in the muck and just, yeah.
I love it. I feel like I fell into it. I always consider myself anti whatever I'm in. Like I was a personal trainer and I hated hanging out with personal trainers. Like this is years ago. But from a journalism standpoint, I started doing interviews maybe 15 years ago. And I was doing interstitial content for a hip hop network.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, this is cool. I really like these conversations. And then fast forward to about 10 years ago, I started 2 podcasts, one called Reckless Breakfast, and this was before people were. I was afraid to use the word podcast because I thought people thought it was an option for storytelling. And one was called
We're on a podcast.
Yeah, no, I know.
But there's 300
But at the beginning, if you had a YouTube channel before YouTube was cool, you're like, really? All right, slow down, buddy. So I used to say I have an interview series. And I think my journalism journey has been more going into people's brains and figuring out how things happen. And maybe not so much traditional journalism storytelling, but I've been invited to several traditional journalism outlets, gatherings, networking events. And it's really interesting to see the juxtaposition of like how I approach storytelling and conversation and in contrast to traditional media industry.
Nice. All right. So you went from hip hop more into journalism, and I went from journalism more into hip hop. I like it. So I, as a kid, loved reading the Baltimore Sun's editorial page, the whole paper. I loved the editorial page. And then at some point around 5th or 6th grade, I grew up in Baltimore, started reading the Washington Post and reading that editorial page. And I would look at the masthead and look at the editorial page editor's name and think, that's what I want to do. I want to be the editorial page editor. I want to be the person who decides the ties in the editorial board and gets to write lots of editorials and sits with this group of esteemed, thoughtful journalists who have done everything. They've reported overseas. They've written for Metro. They've written for National. They've covered the White House. And now they sit and they think about things and they try to give thoughtful perspectives to the readers to help them come to reasonable conclusions. I was very excited about that idea. And then at the end of college, I got offered an internship at USA Today, and that led to working at the Washington Post. And when I got to the editorial board much earlier in my career than one would have expected, Joey knows this, usually it's a long thing you have to do to get to the editorial board. But I got there by age 26. And I looked around and I realized that the editorial page editor basically just goes to embassy parties and lunches and doesn't really do a lot of writing. And there aren't a lot of ties to be broken, honestly. That's not really a thing. And if there were a tie to be broken, they probably just wouldn't write about it because that's too close to say it's the opinion of the editorial board. So I really loved that. And I was grateful I got to do it. And in getting to do it, I got to see that the way that journalism was going and the disintegration of depth and accuracy in favor of clicks and page views and eyeballs, I hope you can hear my air quotes, it was becoming not the thing that I had thought it would be. I wanted to help create a more fully informed citizenry through straight up facts and analysis, and it was turning into something different. And I looked elsewhere and wound up at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. And now I do that while managing Gangstagrass. So I have stepped out of journalism, but grew up in it.
I heard there was no future in journalism.
I heard that last night at the dinner table from you, was it?
From Chris.
I'm not that hopeless of a human. I'm relentlessly, I was thinking about it this morning. Somebody's going to crack the nut of all the matrices of things that need to happen to make news and journalism feel, at least, to somewhat what we grew up with. And whoever that is and however that happens, they're going to be winning. If you look at the history of innovations and how certain industries were in decline, and then Jeff Bezos decides to start an online bookstore, right? It's almost to the point where nobody goes to bookstores anymore. So as you look at things decline and what rises in its place, I'm excited to see what might happen. Sorry, I was way too late last night. Excited to see what inventions are going to come out, because there is that nexus of potential that we have the potential to reach.
Personally, there's absolutely a future in journalism. If there isn't one right now, I'm going to just forge ahead and try to make one. It's imperative to functioning society to have someone who's documenting what's happening in the back of the room, where decision makers are making decisions, impacting your taxes, impacting where you live. The government closest to you is the one that impacts you the most, yet that's where a lot of the cuts are happening in journalism. There is a future. We're just in this weird gray area where we've got to figure out what the future is going to look like from a revenue standpoint, from an audience standpoint. We just have to find some solutions. It's not as easy as it was in the 80s when they printed money and they all owned the publisher of the newspaper on the biggest house in town. It's not as easy as that anymore. We're just like everyone else. We have to figure stuff out, and we have to operate on like normal margins and run a real business. And it's just not as cushy as it used to be. And to people in journalism, that is, oh my God, we're dying. We just have to operate like a real business.
That's an interesting point, right? Because if you think you're dying, you're not necessarily going to be taking the most thoughtful actions. It's a fight or flight kind of situation. And it doesn't have to die. I think it's a question. It's an open question whether there's a future in journalism. When I was contemplating leaving the Post because so much had already changed, layers of editing had gone by the wayside, taking buyouts after buyouts. And we started losing copy editors, losing assignment editors, gaining video editors, but that is not the same thing. And I talked with a friend of mine who had, at the time he was hired, been the youngest person ever hired onto the Washington Post editorial board, Ben Wittes, brilliant scholar, I believe now with Brookings. And he said, the Washington Post as you know it, as we know it, will not exist in 10 years. And I was like, yeah, the internet is changing everything. And of course, there's been buyouts. It's going to be tough. But I didn't realize how right he was, because by 10 years later, by now, the Washington Post has been sold by the Graham family, bought by Jeff Bezos, and the actual building at 15th and L Street Northwest in DC, where all the Watergate meetings and everything, not the meetings with Deep Throat, but the meetings between the editors and the reporters, where all that stuff in the movie happened, that building got demolished and it's been replaced by this green glass monstrosity. So literally the Washington Post as we know it did not exist 10 years later. So I will say, yes, it's an open question whether there is a future in journalism or whether there is no future in journalism. But what's not an open question is that there is no palatable future for any of us without real, reliable, solid, traditional journalism.
Take me through the timeline of journalism. I know it started with nailing a letter to a tree.
Didn't Shakespeare do that? That's it.
And then
Yelling things in a town square.
Yeah. Then what happened?
Okay.
I'm a journalist, not a
This wasn't a
historian.
warm-up.
Well, something about a printing press.
Wasn't it like a person that used to go from town to town and actually read the news?
Yeah.
There was a
Yeah,
movie
literally.
recently with Tom Hanks. I want to say it was Tom Hanks, but somebody was going around reading the stories, and it was this community experience of, it's almost like going to a concert, right?
Yeah.
Or early radio. It's with 150 people in a barn and somebody's telling you what's going on.
They're yelling things in the town square.
Yeah.
And now popular podcasts are doing them live. So
yeah.
everything has happened and it will happen again. But so the condensed version of that is that journalism used to be flush with cash. There used to be 3 people that sat at the table. I'm going to fast forward from nail letter to the tree to modern times a little bit. We're going to gloss over
Skip a couple centuries. Just a couple centuries of.
You have our full support. I'm sorry, we had to cut that section for time. It was really interesting.
You should do some weird edit here. And now here we are.
The interesting thing was that like when I was growing up, there were 3 people that sat at the advertising table, and advertising pays for journalism in a traditional media standpoint. So there were 3 people that sat at the table. There was print media, there was radio, and there was TV. And now there are 100 people at the table. There's 1,000 people at the table. The internet has disrupted all revenue streams. And on top of that, the internet has disrupted audience participation. You've got people interacted with journalism differently than they do today. People used to get the morning paper. They'd read it thoughtfully, I hope, at their table with their coffee, with their kids. They'd go to work, and then they wouldn't think about the news. They maybe talk about it at the water cooler, and then they'd get home. They might have an afternoon paper. Maybe they wouldn't. But they'd watch the evening news, maybe listen to the radio on the way home. They'd get a few updates. But it wasn't as constant. News is physically just constant in my ears. It's in my phone. I bet I've gotten 22 push notifications this morning already. That's not how things used to work. And so now that like we've rapidly disrupted this field, there's a lot of people trying to figure out how to get out of it, or how to make sense of it. But yeah, that's what journalism used to be. It used to be something thoughtful, something that you would read in a printed page or hear in the evening at your television table. Or television table.
You were rich.
Oh,
I
man.
gotta tell you, his family had a television table.
Back in the 80s.
I bet you had a Pac-Man
really
table, too.
television table.
We have a radio table. We had a newspaper table.
I was also up late last night.
If I can add something to what Joey's saying about the past of journalism, it also has gone through, I think, an interesting back and forth where in the early days of the United States, shortly before the country was officially founded, folks like Jefferson thought that news media, the newspapers, the newsletters, the pamphlets were partisan. They were and always would be. And that was fine because with a free press, you'd have the different perspectives. You'd have a partisan pamphlet of one kind, but then you'd have a partisan pamphlet on the other side. So through all of that, people could sort through it and you'd be able to get something useful. And then in the middle, I don't know. I don't actually know I feel it may have been around a world war, but I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but a transition happened where, may have been earlier than that, where it went to an ideal of nonpartisanship and an ideal of objectivity. And I think everybody always recognized that you couldn't be 100% objective, but you could get very close to that ideal. I knew a lot of reporters who didn't vote because they didn't want to feel like they had any skin in the game at all. And I got that, although I didn't feel like that was necessarily the piece that really mattered. And the fact is that you can, nowadays, there are still reporters who don't vote and nonetheless report very unobjectively. So that's not really a fail-safe. And as I say, nowadays, they are not reporting objectively in a lot of ways. And so we're back to this partisan media where they feel their job is to maybe still to bring about a more fully informed electorate, but more to bring about a particular outcome. And when you have different news outlets looking for different outcomes, that's a very different situation.
Where do you guys draw the line between opinion and fact? And I think that's where, in either case, especially like this bipartisanship and then moving to a more idealistic neutrality. But then it's just, here's the information, and there's also, this person's an asshole, and don't follow them, and blah, blah, blah. Can you believe it?
One of the lines is subjective adjectives. That's the thing. That blows me away every time I look at a copy of the New York Times these days. Other newspapers too, but it's really visible in the New York Times, where even in the lead paragraph, but really if it's anywhere in a news story, this is no good. Words like forceful and scathing and unique, but not in the objectively unique, it is the only thing of its kind way, but just, oh, how interesting and novel. They're using those kinds of words rather than, as Joey and I were talking about the other day, show, don't tell, rather than describing what's happening and letting the reader decide what adjectives, what subjective views to place upon that. That's a big change that's happened in journalism. And to me, that's a big piece of where the line between fact and opinion is. Because as soon as you start inserting those things into the news story, you are telling the reader what to think rather than showing them the fullness of the story and letting them decide from there what to think.
It's like subtle hypnotization. Because I think the average reader isn't aware of where the word may lean you.
Exactly.
It feels like you're just getting information. But slowly over time, these drips and drops, I'm actually hypnotizing you into believing this perspective.
And that slowly over time thing is one of the pieces of this that boggles my mind the most. I've asked a bunch of my journalist friends and people I've come across who are still in journalism this question, and I have not gotten an answer. Where did those standards go? Are they gone? Are they still there, but they're just being ignored? Have they changed, officially? I don't really know if we ever had in our guidebook about how to be a good Washington Post journalist, specifically a thing that said no subjective adjectives. We might have, but it was definitely understood. An editor would never have let that by. There's a documentary called The Fourth Estate. I don't know if y'all have caught it, about the New York Times, and they have cameras in the New York Times newsroom and in the Washington bureau. And you'll see in this, I think it's a 4-part documentary, that the editors and reporters are arguing over which subjective adjective to use in a lead. Should we use forceful? Should we say it's forceful speech? Or should we say it's a scathing speech? And at no point, at least not on camera, and I didn't get the impression off camera, did anybody say the correct answer is take out that adjective. Shouldn't be there.
I think that's really well said.
Thank you.
Yeah. The journalism has become, especially from a national standpoint, and our company operates at a very hyper-local localities. We don't exist in this national world, partisan world from our media standpoint. Just as a consumer and someone who's very interested, you've noticed that over the years. What Sleeves is trying to say is 100% real, and it's happened in a time frame that's very short, but it feels like it's happened over a long period of time. We've almost been dumbed down to it a little bit, like we're just used to it.
Yeah.
But it's actually happened within my adulthood.
It's been fast.
Yeah, it's actually realistically been incredibly fast. And it happened. And I know a lot of conspiracy theorists think that journalists hang out in some dungeon somewhere and we try to determine
it's just
how the world is going to happen. Yeah, it's usually a dive bar. There was no meeting that was like, hey, we should start using adjectives like this and we should start becoming more partisan. I never went to a conference that was like, hey, this is a really good, bold business strategy. That's never happened, at least where I've gone. And it was almost just people have just moved into this direction, but it's happened incredibly fast.
I think that's a general societal shift. I interviewed a guy who's, I'd say, he's a vocal coach. And I asked him about what he felt the state of music was today. And he was like, I'm afraid we're getting to a point where we're celebrating mediocrity. And if you watch that person do the cover of Tennessee Whiskey, you're like, that's great. And then you hear Chris Stapleton sing it. You're like, oh, that cover was not great at all. But that person has millions and millions of likes and people are applauding them. And I think the same thing happens in journalism, right? And especially if it's opinionated, the sort of boldest approach is the one that gets the attention. And that boldness may come through adjectives. It may come through language or shouting like shock jocks or these kinds of things. And also the slippery slope, maybe in this conversation, is also what forms of journalism are we talking about? Because I do a lot of work with Fast Company and I helped Inc. launch their Innovate column. So both from a written perspective and from an audio visual storytelling perspective, you've got outlets that are strictly about business and information and ingenuity, and they even thrive off contributors. Those contributors become those outside voices in more the traditional media and journalism storytelling outlets. And then they get to slip certain things through the cracks. Somebody writes an open letter and, oh, now you have license to say whatever you want to say. Or, oh, we have a guest editorial from such and their opinions are not ours. But the average consumer doesn't take that disclaimer into consideration.
I think magazines, like publications, like what you're using as an example, I think some of this existed in those publications, like even when I was younger. Like trade magazines, specific niche magazines, like always had authority to use more creative language than newspapers did. Mm-hmm. And maybe that is where newspapers picked up on some of this. So maybe they were pulling from trade magazines and whatnot, because it's not damaging when you're reading about technology in Wired. When you're like, if they're using really great adjectives, it's just good, entertaining politicians and local government and things that are very hyper political, things that give people really visceral reactions. It can be damaging. Where when you're writing about business development, you're writing about any niche magazine, some of that's just fun, entertaining, good writing. Some of it's just blurring now.
I want to dig a little deeper into something you just said. Holding your interest, that's good writing. And I feel that's exactly the kind of paradigm that is what the journalism world looks at, right? It's, we want to hold their interest, but that's a result of this shift to the internet where you need the eyeballs and you need the clicks and you need the page views to be greater in number and greater in length of time that they're spending on the page. And that doesn't necessarily translate into good reporting, right? There are great writers who are terrible reporters and vice versa, very much vice versa, which is why you need great editors. I would caution readers not to assume that just because something is good writing, that makes it something reliable, and also to be willing to give some grace and patience to those articles that you have a hard time getting through, not because they're badly written, but because they aren't holding your interest because they're about a legitimately boring topic like federal policy around the monetary systems or some minute but important piece of federal legislation that has to be reported on and that informed voters should know about, but is not sexy, is not going to hold your interest. But if we're being good citizens, we should give it our interest and our attention anyway.
I think that's where tone comes in, right? I think what consumers expect from the tone of the entertainment and or journalism they encounter. So when you say that, well, let's say it's stodgy language on a semi-boring topic, but you take somebody like Vice or Cheddar, right, where they've younged up the tonality of how they present stories.
When you say that, what does that sound? Is that basically snark? It seems like, the toned it, younged it up.
Like,
that's generally just snarkiness.
Not necessarily. No, not you just shitted on the whole generation.
I'm just looking at the writing. I'm just looking at the writing.
Well, the writing, yes, but I don't know. You take, we were talking about the Daily Show last night, right? That was one of the ways I absorbed my news because I was that person who I ignored the stories, but if you could also give me some comedy along with it and some good information, and I don't feel heavy when I encounter the story, that was a great brand experience for me. And I love comedy and I like being informed. And I think the same thing when the few times I've watched Cheddar, it feels like an updated version of CNN, where there's no suits and things, but there's just like a millennial kind of delivery of the same information without bias.
Check it out.
it's hard to have a conversation about news outlets, about journalism, about the future of journalism. None of us have a context. Two of the people, I don't know if you knew it. Did you know what cheddar was?
No, I do now.
Okay, so you had this really interesting thought, and you were using this example, and you were like, this is going to help. We all have that. None of us know what the hell we watch. And so there's a billion outlets. There's a bunch of sources out there. And I think that is like, to bring things full circle to, we were talking about the history. Everyone in America, not everyone in the world, but like specifically in America, they had like just a few outlets. We were all consuming the same news. We were all consuming the same information. Now it's so particleized where you're getting it in a completely different manner than I'm getting it. And I'm not even aware.
I'm getting mine from a box of snacks.
Yes, a Cheez-It box. And while Chris is reading his news on the Cheez-It box, I'm reading something completely different on the back of a Skittles wrapper. And none of us are, so it makes communicating in society difficult because none of us are coming at conversations about tough topics with the same context. We're not coming at things with the same information. So Chris got his information completely differently than I got my information. And so there's this massive information gap where he wants to talk about this one topic. And I read about that same topic, but there were 800 different facts in my story, and there were 800 facts in his story, and they were different. And it makes having just real conversations when you're talking to people makes it incredibly difficult. Just like, that's not true. That's not true. I read this. It's because none of us are just getting our information in the same place and we're not all reading the same things. It makes just having civil discourse incredibly difficult. And I think that was illustrated here.
Right. Because you need to have a common basis for a shared reality. And if you don't have that, that's a big problem. And we're also siloed it happens because of our Google searches and our cookies and what our browsers and our phones
and
know about us.
Feed us all different individual stories.
That's exactly it. The algorithms when it comes to journalism and politics are to push us toward things that will, again, make us stay on that site longer or visit that site to visit it more often for longer periods of time. And in order to do that, it has to tantalize us a bit too. And that is a problem because that's the thing that leads to each little piece getting more extreme. Every time the YouTube rolls to the next video and it plays, it thinks, okay, that this person liked that. Here's something a little further. Here's something a little more in that rabbit hole. So if you fall asleep watching YouTube, goodness knows what you're going to wake up to, what kind of crazy conspiracy theories. And that also talks about what happened, where the shift to opinion happened. With the newspapers, as Joey was talking about, and the 3 TV networks, we used to have this small number of information outlets that reached pretty much everybody in the country. So we had this shared reality, and they were on what I would love to call the 24-hour news cycle. That is, you have 24 hours to complete your cycle, right? You report something, you check, editors go through it, multiple editors go through it. You check again, you call your sources back, you make sure everything is as right as possible. And after all of those hours, it goes to print or it goes on air. Comes out as a story. Maybe you then find out you got something wrong and you have to issue a correction, but you have that full 24 hours. And now we have 24 hours of news cycling. We have constant time that has to be filled. It all has to be filled. So newspapers, when the internet came along, that was a great thing in some ways, not Craigslist, but a great thing in some ways because it allowed infinite space where there was not space before. So where the newspaper had to cut things and couldn't give you quite all the information it wanted to, it could now include those things in an online story, or it could include an extra story that couldn't fit in the print edition. And yet with TV news, It's not optional the way it is with the internet. You don't have to fill all of that space on the internet, but on 24-hour cable news, and I use the term news extremely loosely, you have to fill all of that time. And that's how we ended up with this shift to opinion, I would speculate, because as you are trying to fill those 24 hours, even though you could get 24 hours of great news, important world events, and thoughtful analysis, it is way easier and way more ratings gaining to bring in people who can talk in a way that gets you riled, makes you want to watch more, gets you angry, and is about the same things over and over again, rather than going around the world and talking about what's happening in West Africa, in East Africa, and now we're moving over to the Middle East, and now let's talk about Australia. And that just isn't happening on cable news at all.
Both of you touching on the fact that a lot of audiences have to put different pieces of the puzzle together to get one truth. Where do you guys go from, or how do you assemble your own truth? You read two stories on the same thing, and then they both say two completely different things. What process do you go through to go, all right, here's the real story? And that's a lot of work for a consumer.
Probably Joey and I have an unfair advantage here because we know journalists. Having worked at the Washington Post when I did, a lot of the people that I worked with are now at the New York Times or at the Wall Street Journal. A couple are still at the Post and elsewhere, foreign affairs, foreign policy. I know I watched as their stories came in. I listened as the editors worked with them on their stories. I would take dictation when they were calling from remote places from their satellite phones. So I got to know which reporters were really good and really checked their facts. They even got the spelling of names right on the first try. Just very thorough and detail-oriented reporters versus other reporters who maybe aren't that. And when you have great editing, that difference doesn't really matter. But once those layers of editing go away, it does matter. So I look for those names. I look for a Peter Baker. I look for a Peter Goodman. I look for an Anthony Fiola. I look for an Emily Wax because they are great reporters. And it's not going to matter that probably no editor has even looked at some of the words that they've written in this article. And yet I know I can trust it.
So when you are traveling around with Gangstergrass, and you're like, my first go-to is Twitter. Which is probably the worst place to go. But I'm always like, I look for what's trending. And then I go, the work is me going down all the stories and the funny commentary and the trolling. And then maybe 15 thumb scrolls down is, there's the story. And then, but that's work for me as on the other side of not being a storyteller is just, what's happening? And is that actually happening? And then somebody else tells you a completely different story about the same thing.
This is the crazy thing. I'm traveling around with Gangstergrass, so sometimes I'm not catching regular news. I'm not necessarily talking with the people I would be talking with in our little bubble on tour. And when Kevin McCarthy was ousted, the first time I heard about it was Wrench telling me. My phone did not tell me. So my phone doesn't know what I really want. What my phone did tell me was that, and these are the headlines that are coming across me. As soon as I look at the screen and pull down the thing, it shows me the bunch of headlines, tons of headlines. One of them is a woman woman angry that 2 kids were robbed in such and such a place. And that doesn't matter to me in the least. It's just, why are you showing me these celebrity news? It's showing me these things. I'm not clicking on it. I'm trying to, if I click on it, it's because I want to say thumbs down.
Right.
Please don't show me more of this. And we don't have the filters that we need to stop it from doing that.
I've created my own filters. I try to spend way less time on social media, 1.
Nice.
But 2, my biggest recommendation when people ask me that question is find a local source that you like, a local news wherever you live. Find a local source that you trust, that you think does good work, and subscribe to their email newsletter. They will send you in your email a curated, this is what you need to know about what's going on locally. Our publication does that. If you care about Harvey County, Kansas, you are going to get a newsletter in your email every day, 4 or 5 days a week, that says, hey, here's what you need to know about what's going on around you in your county. Subscribe to a statewide news source that you trust. For me, it's the Kansas Reflector. I'm a big advocate for what they do. They've, I think, tripled the amount of reporters in our state house over the last 4 years. It's a nonprofit outlet that was started after a hedge fund bought the Topeka Capital Journal, and a lot of them started the Kansas Reflector to boost up Topeka coverage. Topeka is the Kansas capital, and I care about what's happening in the capital. So I subscribed to the e-newsletter for the Kansas Reflector. And then I subscribed to a newsletter from the Washington Post and the New York Times. And every day when I get up in the morning, I'm drinking my coffee to bring almost completely full circle. It's like having my curated daily newspaper, but it's on my phone. And so rather than scrolling through Twitter or through social media, I'm finding the sources that I really care about, and I'm subscribing to their e-newsletter, and I'm letting them tell me, hey, this is the information you need to know. And then after that, I get on social media and I look at all the trolling.
That's a good order of operations. I have a question for you, Joey. So you're suggesting that people go look at local news, and that seems like a good suggestion, but is it worth making a distinction between print and television? And specifically, how do you know how much of the news content that's coming through your local news sources is pay to play? Those segments on the local news that look like a feature about a local restaurant or about a kind of car, but really are a paid sponsorship where a real news story or a real local interest thing where a person is not paying to be on the news could have been featured.
You were catching my own personal bias here. Like I live, because I get to curate it, I get to help make it. I live in a county where my local news doesn't have pay to play. I hadn't even thought about that.
Say the name of that county again, so everybody can.
Harvey County, we do not do any pay to play news. There's zero pay to play. Harvey County doesn't have a TV station specifically to our county. We rely on the Wichita TV stations, and I don't really watch them. Sorry if you're listening. But I think that's a really good distinction. Like, you do need to figure some of this stuff out. And part of that, I think it's really smart that hey, I just know these journalists and like, I trust them.
I wish everybody had that advantage.
If there's anybody who's in media who's listening, I think it's so important for media outlets to force newsrooms into the community and get to know people that you're covering, because it does create that trust. Like, when someone meets a journalist, when someone's interviewed by a journalist, they have an experience that you don't have if you've never done that before. And it is hard to distinguish between pay to play. And personally, I think a lot of TV, I ignore TV news almost exclusively. I don't watch it and I don't consume it. It's not that they can't do any good work. There are a couple of TV journalists in the Wichita metro market that they do really good work. And if I do see something that they're doing, we'll consume it. But largely, I think television is not doing good work. And so I just don't consume it. But that's not to say all print is doing a good job. If your newspaper is owned by Gannett or Alden Global or some other giant hedge fund, you might just not have local news because in the town I grew up in, a town of 40,000 people in Kansas, I worked at this daily paper. It was 30,000 circulation paper less than 10 years ago. And there had to have been 40, 50 plus people in the newsroom. That's not all reporters. Those are editors. Those are people who work on the copy desk. Those are photographers. There are all these people who are working on news in this town of 40,000 people. And the Hutchinson News has won a Pulitzer Prize. And it's it used to be this fabulous news source for Reno County and Hutchinson. And right this second, there's not one reporter who works at the Hutchinson News. Every single one has either taken a buyout or been laid off, because the family that owned the Hutchinson News sold it to a hedge fund who then just stripped it of everything that made it good.
I'm just curious, like, if we're talking about the future of journalism, how do we fix it? Or if you go into University USA and somebody decides to be a journalism major, what are they going to learn and what kind of job are they going to get? And how are they going to learn to deliver all the things that we feel are missing from the experience?
Man, I don't know what's going on in the journalism school these days. I didn't go to journalism school. I wanted to work my way up, if I even got into journalism at all, which was not a certainty. I wanted to work with my way up through the mailroom like my heroes had, really learn every bit of the newsroom and do everything. And I did. I wrote for Metro and National and all those things. But one of the things that you can definitely do is train people in those old school standards to be journalists. And that's what Joey's over here trying to do. Get those local people trained up to be journalists, right?
Could AI ever be a journalist?
If it got rid of its Dunning-Kruger situation.
What's that?
The Dunning-Kruger effect is the idea that the less, the more certain you are about what you think you know, because you don't know enough to realize how ignorant you are about
That's how I
it.
live my life.
Like a confirmation bias?
It's related to the confirmation bias. So the confirmation bias rate is where you are so certain of what you believe that you look for things to confirm it. Dunning-Kruger is more just about what you're certain of already. That the more information you gather, the more knowledge you have, the more you realize what you don't know, and you have therefore less certainty about the whole thing. And that's correct, because there's infinite information out there, and it's basically impossible to be certain about anything ever. That's a reasonable stance. But we end up with an AI, because it's trained by a bunch of Dunning-Kruger susceptible humans, that thinks it needs to be certain about stuff. And it will tell you. I did a chat with Chat GPT a little while back asking about the song from, I don't know, early 90s, I think this song happened, called Hard Times by Fresh Bush and the Invisible Man. And Chat GPT couldn't recognize, look it up, it's hilarious. It uses...
I don't think I want to type Fresh Bush into my Google.
Okay, fair point.
Google search bar.
Fair point. And Hard Times, yeah.
Talk about algorithms.
This is now a problem.
What kind of news am I getting?
I see this. You can get it though, and it safe search.
Pruning shears.
Fine. And when I asked ChatGPT about this, it insisted that the song was a serious social commentary and refused to acknowledge that it was satire. And when I asked it how many serious social commentary songs have the lyrics, I almost peed myself in them. And ChatGPT was like, it would be very unlikely for that to happen. And I was like, okay, you want to revisit your thoughts on whether this is satire? And it was like, I'm certain that this is a social commentary, serious song, not satire, and that those words are not in this song. And I asked again, are you sure those words aren't in the song? Thank you for giving me the opportunity to check. Those words are definitely not in the song, but they are. They're right there in the lyrics. So you can't have, if you had a reporter who was constantly going to his editor saying, I'm absolutely certain about this, and was just dead wrong, that would be a real problem, because you'd be getting tons of inaccurate information out to people. And if you don't have real human editors, those high quality editors like we used to have, checking stuff just like they would check a real reporter, they got to check the AI too, and they have to know, they have to have the knowledgeability and the subject area expertise to know when the AI is just bullshitting. Otherwise, we're just going to go down, it's just going to be a death spiral.
Chris, you asked a little bit ago about what are the good things that are happening? Where's it going? You have done some stuff with Fast Company, and we talked about how else media can monetize itself.
Yeah, I have this theory about just brand building. I come from the marketing space, and everything's about how do we extend this experience into other mediums, other IRL experiences. So just a couple of weeks ago, I was hosting the Fast Company Innovation Festival. 3 days of amazing talks and workshops and hands-on being able to play with different kinds of innovations. And from what I heard, this was their biggest sponsorship year. 9 years of doing this festival, a couple of years during the pandemic, one's online, and everybody there felt really great. And then you think about how Inc. or Fast Company or these other outlets start to have their awards and these other sort of money makers that accompany the editorial experience, let alone whether they're drawing very distinct lines around branded entertainment and experiences versus editorial. Even at Fast Company, I've worked on both sides of that equation to the point where I had to have a call with the editor and editor-in-chief about which side I'm going to be on, because as a personality, I'm showing up on both branded stuff, and so I had to pick a lane. But that was not to their integrity. But this idea of, we're creating as many experiences and we're being inventive about what accompanies it so that we can afford to do journalism, and which is trippy. You got to do a bunch of backflips and imagine big and figure out like, oh, are we making money off our social media account? Are we making money off of YouTube? Are we making money off of the events? Are we making money off subscriptions? Because when you click on that thing and it's, oh, you want to read the rest of this article? That's going to be 99 cents. Let me go find the story somewhere else. So what's going to keep me loyal to this brand of news? And I don't see that as much in the socio-political news space, right? There's no CNN con, right, that I know of. But anyway, that's my thoughts on it.
Quick shout out to ProPublica, who seems to be doing some good stuff too. And also a note that the New York Times recently went to most of its revenue coming from subscriptions. And it does seem like that's changed how they report, because instead of being beholden to not really anybody when you're beholden to classified ads, there's no real opinion coming through here. They're now beholden to a bunch of subscribers who are largely in the same ideological model. So if they don't write things that those subscribers will like and agree with, back to the confirmation bias, they risk losing subscribers. They actually risk their revenue by writing things that their readers might not like.
I'm really encouraged by both of things that you just said. So what Chris said about doing some events and diversifying revenue and trying some different things with your audience, give them what they want, try to fund journalism through those outlets. I think that's one, really smart and practical. We're trying to do that in a very local, small setting. We throw a concert once a year and we sell beer and we invite people into the park in Newton, Kansas. And we're like, hey, we're going to do blues music for 6 hours today, and we're going to sell beer. We're going to be food trucks. And this is one reason not to leave Newton and go to Wichita this weekend. Come stay in our town, spend money here, support the newsroom.
And what brings you hope?
Gangsta Grass brings me hope. And the reason that Gangsta Grass brings me hope, if you haven't had a chance to listen to Gangsta Grass, go to gangstagrass.com and or Google Gangsta Grass. You can just put bluegrass hip hop into your Google. You'll probably get it too. But check out Gangsta Grass. Check out the latest album, No Time for Enemies. It hit #1 in the Billboard Bluegrass chart. And this is a band that you would not expect would hit #1 in the Billboard Bluegrass chart because it has real hip hop MCs in it. And that was the first time that real hip hop MCs have been #1 in the Billboard Bluegrass chart. So something that can bring people together across differences, that can bring different people into the same room. And maybe they're not so different, but it brings red and blue. It brings little kids and teenagers and middle-aged people, and we have 102-year-old fans, 80-year-old fans dancing through the whole show, and they're all in that room together and they become friends. And that gives me hope. We need to get people in the same places together so that they get to know each other and realize that they're not so different, that they're not really threatening each other, and that neither side in the reasonable middle is really threatening our democracy. We just have some different opinions that we need to work through.
I think a lot of what she just said is true, and I think it's great. And I would agree with a lot of what she just said, personally. To build on that, what I would say brings me hope is just young people. I was surrounded by, I'm not even old, but
You're almost 40.
I'm almost 40, yeah. I think that's old, but
It's almost old.
I was just restating the fact. See, there was no opinion in there. I didn't use any adjectives.
Right.
and I know not everybody listening to this is
adjective.
who would have been at the summit during this whole thing, but there were some amazing young people. There was these two people just raising hell in Atlanta that I got to connect with this week. And they're doing incredible work, and they're full of vigor and passion and hope for the future. And they have this intense energy and aura around them. And I'm like, how can you not feel hope when you're around people like that? How can you not? And so I would say young people like that.
I'd say innovation brings me hope, right? I think the endorphins that get released when you figure out a problem in an inventive way is why we enjoy creative problem solving as human beings. Every job that anybody has, you got to figure something out, right? If you're a janitor and you're like, oh, I don't have enough time to do all these rooms, let me figure out a different system to do it. Or if you're the CEO of GE and you're talking about the next industrial revolution, you have this constant wave of, we've all here today discussed a problem and we were ideating on some things and that sort of thing. I also feel like when you cannot find a solution to your problems, that's where the frustration and the hurt and all the things start to come out of people. And I think the state of journalism is, I don't know how to fix this problem. And that's where all the discourse comes. Everybody's just upset because of lack of solution to the issues that we have out there. So back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast. I forgot what I said at the beginning of the podcast. What did I say?
Way to bring it full circle, Chris.
Yeah,
that was
something
great.
about Cheez-Its. I read.
Yes, it
So
was definitely
back to the
Cheez-Its.
cheese. Everybody's going to be snacking. I just feel that hope for great ideas bursting forth through the center of culture
Yes.
that change things. And that happens every few years in an amazing way. And I don't think we've seen it yet in this space, but we will.
You're here.
Yeah.
Here.
I'm Tate Chamberlin. This is the Hatch Podcast, dispatch from the heartland, state of journalism. We've got Sleeves, Chris Denson, and Joey. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Tate.
So maybe journalism was never about delivering the news. Maybe it was always about connection, about someone taking the time to figure out what was really happening, and someone else taking the time to listen. From letters nailed to trees, to news alerts on our phones, the tools have changed, but the impulse hasn't. We still want to understand our world. We still want to know what's true. Big thanks to Sleeves, Joey, and Chris for talking through the messy, beautiful, and possible task of telling stories that matter. The landscape keeps shifting. Radio, to print, to TV, to TikTok. But maybe that's not the end of journalism. Maybe that's just the next version. I'm Tate Chamberlin. Thanks for listening. Music for Dispatch from the Heartland is by Gangsta Grass, an electrifying blend of bluegrass and hip-hop that captures the spirit of the heartland. Stay tuned. Later in this series, we'll delve deeper into Gangsta Grass's story and their unique sound in our full episode. Don't miss it.
Son, rebel no pauses, taking out your forces with a switchblade and a rusty gun. Doing this forever, you've just begun. Don't start none, it won't be none.
It seems now more than ever that we have found ourselves on the cusp of monumental worldwide change. Whether we consider the environment, politics, infrastructure, health, economics, or inequities across a broad swath of social constructs, the consensus is clear and urgent. All is not as it should be. The United Nations, a consortium of 193 member states from around the globe, agrees. In 2015, the UN unanimously adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals call for urgent action and global partnership to secure peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future.
In alignment with the SDGs, Hatch, a curated network of artists, activists, and entrepreneurs working together to accelerate positive global change, has partnered with I Am Interchange to fuse adventure journalism with experiential design labs to develop innovative solutions to complex global challenges. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoy it, please subscribe or leave us a rating. This episode was produced by Yara Craner, Susan Karstensen, and me, Tate Chamberlin. A shout out to our media and production team, Jessica Byerly, Darko Sevilla, Jacob Desch, Sean Mackinson, Amin Yarsu, and Zane Giordano. With so much gratitude to the Hatch supporters, Steelcase, the Kauffman Foundation, the Gwydion Fund, Envision Equality, the Hatch Volunteers, Board of Directors, Hatch Guardians, and the community who help make this work and mission possible. To learn more about Hatch, visit hatchexperience.org. Building community could not happen without food. And with that, I'd like to thank Whistle Pig Korean, Red Tractor Pizza, and Zocalo Coffee House. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.